I have a lot of aggression to take out. Hello everyone, welcome to Layout Out Podcast, a no bullshit science podcast.
With extra bullshit.
I'm Curie.
And I'm Alice.
And this is Demelza. Yay! We have nothing to talk about.
Okay, so Curie, last week you expressed concerns that you might die because it's so hot. How's that going?
I'm still dying.
But I mean, you know what? Tomorrow is supposed to be 23 degrees.
I know, I can't wait.
Chilly.
I really want winter to come now.
I know. I've been dreaming about wearing scarves and polo necks.
Me too.
And drinking tea and not sweating from the back of my neck.
But you know, there's the whole thing of when it's hot, you're meant to be eating hot stuff and drinking hot stuff.
No, I just don't get that.
Like in Korea, they'll always eat hot soups when it's hot, and then the old men will say it's refreshing. Yes.
Yeah.
But it has been kind of sad because I have an axolotl. She's called Cisa, and
Should you maybe explain what that is for people who don't know what axolotls are, such as myself before I met you?
It's basically it's a salamander that hasn't morphed into a land-dwelling salamander yet.
So it has to stay in the water.
Yeah.
And it's really cute and kind of looks like it's smiling all the time.
Yeah, she's really, really cute. We'll put a picture on the Instagram.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because they like quite cold water temperatures, so about 18 degrees is perfect for them. And because it's been so hot, the water's been getting really, really hot, and she wasn't eating. Yeah, so normally
she's on hunger strike.
Yeah, normally she's a really good eater, but I'd wave her food in front of her face and she just wouldn't eat it. So then I bought these aquarium fans. And like, you clip it onto the back of the tank and you turn it on and it's like, it's really noisy, it's really annoying.
So wait, do you sleep with that on? Because she's in your bedroom.
Yeah. But it's dropped the water temperature down by like 6 degrees. And now she's eating again.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
What does Cisa eat?
I feed her raw prawns.
Nice.
Apparently earthworms are really good for them. But I just can't bring myself to buy any earthworms just yet.
No.
Because I need to chop them up as well. And I know they won't feel the pain, but I'm scared that they will. And
you just don't want to do that.
No. Also, I just don't want to touch a worm.
No. Although I'm pretty sure I used to touch them like when I was a kid. Would you not have done that? No?
Probably not worms. I used to play with ants when I was a kid, but not worms.
I used to play with snails too.
And it used to freak me the fuck out when people would like cut worms in half and watch them wriggle away.
Yeah, that was gross.
You know, I discovered not long ago that I think I was scared of snails.
What?
But I didn't realise until Demelza made me realise, because there was a snail, someone put a snail near my face, and I've moved the fastest I've ever moved in my life. Away from the snail. Also, this conversation is really fucking boring. We were having such a better conversation before we started.
So we go back to Cisa. I actually had a question about the prawns.
Go for it.
So she's not that big. Do you feed her like the tiny little prawns?
I slice them up. So I buy king prawns and then I cut them into 2 slices.
King prawns.
Yeah.
Oh, she's getting the fancy prawns.
She gets bougie food.
Do you buy them from M&S or Waitrose?
She's not that bougie.
You mean you're not that bougie?
Yeah.
Well, you wish you were.
I wish. But I don't want to do it.
Okay, let's talk to our guest.
We have another scientist guest on this week. This guest was actually one of the first people I ever spoke to the podcast about. And you were like, yeah, go for it. Like, he was really encouraging. And also it's going to be really interesting because he does something that all of us have absolutely no idea on anything about. Like, they use lots of words that I know what they mean, but when he talks about them, I don't know what they mean. Yeah.
It just sounds like I explain it really badly. That doesn't bode well for this. What's taking so long to get on this podcast, Curie? You should have hauled me in straight from the start.
She was saving you.
She was saving me. I'll go with that. I like that. Yeah.
Also, just to let everybody know that our guest's name is Joe.
Yeah, thanks.
Because Curie missed out on that part.
Yeah, it's Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Barnby. My second name's Joe Barnby, just in case.
You know, every time I see your surname, I really want to say Barnaby.
I know, a lot of people do. I should just change it to that. It'd be a lot easier.
Yeah.
Especially at school. Would have been a lot
Someone
simpler.
probably dropped the A trying to be original back down the historical line.
At some point,
Or
probably.
they worked in a barn.
Barnby.
It's Danish, actually. It means kid village.
Oh, God.
How about that? Quick
that
pop
sounds
fact for you.
That sounds
creepy.
I don't want to know what your ancestors did.
Well, they were Vikings. They're probably like... I got my genetics done, by the way. I did one of those genetic testing kits.
Cool.
Which I know is interesting.
So did Demelza. Silent Demelza.
Really?
Yeah.
Demelza, what was your origins? I've got a varied one.
She has a lot of Jew.
Yeah, she was like...
I have some Jew.
Yeah.
I have some Ashkenazi Jew.
Yeah, so does Demelza.
Yeah.
I know my theory was like bullshit, but I think obviously the Ashkenazi Jews like spread out all over the place.
Well, they did. There was a
Because
big...
Reese as well, and I think Heya both, they all had.
Are they the
Ashkenazi
biggest
Jews.
population of Jew?
Well, they must.
Should we bring
Ashkenazi,
in,
no,
wait,
they're
can
not.
we bring in our other guest because this is a conversation he could actually join in on.
Okay.
Are you Jewish?
No.
All right.
I am a Spurs supporter, but no.
So we actually asked Joe to bring on a late guest for us this time because we're running out of friends. And so Joe's brought on his friend, Will.
Will Smith.
Oh, yes. No jokes, please.
Not the famous one,
No.
sadly.
More sad for me than anyone else. I'd be absolutely loaded.
And not here, probably. Or friends of
This
theirs.
would be so beneath me.
How dare you?
So I got,
Yeah.
in case anyone's interested,
Yeah.
5% Ashkenazi Jew, snap. 5% North African, because half my family are from Portugal. So 25% Portuguese, interesting. And then I have like the rest pretty much German Danish.
So you're like a Portuguese Viking.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So
Exotic.
yeah, I'm like a kind of a warrior that's also into poetry and all the stuff that the Moors brought with them. So maths, warfare, Who
Who the Moors?
they invaded like all of Southern Europe. So they invaded all of Southern Europe.
Maths is the first thing, is it?
Algebra.
Yeah. So a warrior race, they're not going to like talk about maths.
Didn't the Greeks do maths?
No. Algebra. Maybe they did maths, but I think
I'm pretty sure
algebra was
The
like...
Greeks did like loads of philosophy. No.
And
Yes.
maths.
Yeah.
All the philosophers were mathematicians.
Were they?
Yes.
I think that's wrong.
Like Socrates.
I feel like
He's a
maths
mathematician.
Kind of was
Hippocrates.
philosophy back in the day, weirdly.
What?
Plato.
No, I'm not. Who am I thinking of? Who's the guy that jumped in the bath?
Archimedes.
You can tell this isn't a philosophy podcast.
Oh my god, we should definitely get a philosopher on here.
I'd love to get a philosopher on.
That would be
No,
fantastic.
wait, we are. We're going to get a philosopher on.
Okay, guys, if any of you are philosophers,
Wait,
any
no,
of our
someone's a
5
philosopher is
listeners.
coming on.
Who?
Ben. Oh, sorry.
Will you chill? Getting very aggy over here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I noticed that as a guest.
It is a bit hot.
Alice seems a lot more chilled than you.
It's really warm and I'm really
It's quite
sad that we
warm.
have nothing to talk about.
Why is it so warm in here? Normally it's
I
nice
don't
and air
know.
conditioned.
I don't know. Should
Maybe
we?
maybe we should cancel this episode.
This is one that is devolving quite fast.
It really is.
Should we just get on to like normal chat?
Yeah.
Should we start by asking our lay guests some questions? Because then when
Yeah,
we get into
go
you,
on.
then we can go into all your little segments.
Yeah, okay.
Great. So, Will, what do you do?
What do? I work for a kind of patent and trademark attorney. So kind of, there's a lot of scientists there, but I'm not really that involved with what they're working on. But I just do marketing for them. So getting the word out, encouraging people to protect their inventions and stuff, basically.
Oh, that's cool.
That's nice.
Um,
So that they don't get what's the term? Like
sued.
or what is it? Intellectual property.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So protecting their IP.
Yeah.
You have a master's in...
But yeah, no. So my background, like, because marketing's so random now. I did undergrad and masters in English Lit, which doesn't lead into anything useful.
I
so-
hated English at school. Like, I fell asleep in every single English lesson at school.
I actually really liked it, and my English teacher told me that I wrote one of the best essays on Emily Dickinson that she had ever read.
Oh,
I
that's
know,
nice.
I know.
She followed that with, I've never read any of it on Emily Dickinson. Who's Emily Dickinson? She was famously quoted as saying.
Okay, fine, rain on my parade.
Yeah. So you did your masters in English Lit as well?
Yeah, that's right.
My
So-
cousin also did English Lit, now she works for the civil service.
Well, it's just random. It basically just teaches you how to argue
Yeah.
and how to just.
She's really good at arguing.
And basically, it teaches you how to take loads of stuff that makes no sense and just stuff it into an argument. Like, kind
Wait,
of
can I
make
ask you a
it-
question about
Sounds
your
like
degree?
science.
Well, yeah, but you don't have to
you have
actually
to be
back it up with anything. Which
And you
is-
have to-
Neither do we, really.
We need to be
Well,
more polite and science.
Is your degree full of those people that they will read in a book and they'll be like, the wall was red, and all of a sudden there's all this meaning behind why the wall was red.
Oh, I
but
love
you're
that,
like,
though.
maybe she just wanted the wall to be red.
Well, yeah, no, this is absolutely right. But what a literary scholar or student would say was, what the author's intention is completely beside the point. Because when it leaves their pen or keyboard or whatever, it takes on new meaning. Blah 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 blah. it basically teaches you how to bullshit really well. That is the one skill I came out of it with.
I think science is that as well.
I was going to say, I think that's what we get taught.
Yeah,
but you have people peer reviewing it, going like, "This is actually
I think
shit."
it is.
Yeah, but then there's a whole argument about like if they're just trying to bend it to their narrative.
No, but I
and it's
suppose
like-
if you're in English lit, then you can sort of be like, well, this is all a subjective opinion.
Well,
right?
exactly.
But
You'd
we
be
can't
like,
do
well,
that
whatever.
because we have to have
Yeah.
evidence-based things backing us up.
True.
Did you
Although-
used to like to read?
I
mean, you'd think so, right?
No, but I just think
Surely all of us do.
No. I was going to study English, and then I thought it was going to take all the joy out of reading.
Well, I actually weirdly didn't read as much as some of my friends that didn't do English. But what I used to like to do was finding like themes in novels and stuff. So I can't really read now without a pencil. So I like underline stuff. So I used to like finding connections between different bits of text or whatever and finding things like that. So it's almost quite a scientific approach to reading.
Yeah, like systematic.
Yeah, because I like finding themes and stuff and doing that, finding the meaning behind the red wall, as you put it. Yeah.
Interesting.
Lovely.
So what was your relationship with science like ever at school or later on?
I was a bit of a kind of a jack of all trades in school. So I like my A levels. Well, I didn't actually do any science at A level, but I did like maths, history, English, and art. So kind of a bit of a random selection. I didn't really like physics that much, but biology and chemistry I was kind of into. But what I found interesting is when you're on an English degree, when when any kind of scientific topic comes up, again, like the bullshit takes over. So with like psychology and stuff, in English lit courses, you actually get kind of an introduction to quite a few basic like psychology ideas and stuff. But
Historical ones.
yeah, like a lot of the time it's kind of like early 1900s ideas. So like Freud and what? Oh no, that's not 1900s, is it? I don't know when he was.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. End of the 19th century.
But basically, literary scholars will look at this stuff and then just say, yeah, I disagree with that for absolutely no reason other than it doesn't go with what I want to say. And then they'll just come up with their own thing, have no scientific backing, but they'll bullshit their way. Like, there's something called the mirror stage, I think.
Yeah, Lacan.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, they just love talking about, like, shit that doesn't make sense scientifically, but just arguing the scientists out of the equation.
But scientists do that too sometimes.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'd say. You notice that happens in, I mean, arguably not necessarily, but we all have our biases, right? Actually, this leads really nicely into my research topic. But we all have overvalued ideas that we bend
Should we leave?
our reality
Yeah.
to.
Let's go. They're better hosts than we are.
We all have overvalued ideas that we sort of like to bend information toward, and you tend to see that expressed quite highly sometimes in kind of mental health conditions, right? So you have a core idea that then other pieces of evidence and reality seem to bend towards that, and you kind of disconfirm a lot of evidence to the contrary, and you confirm a lot of evidence that might go towards that. It sort of tends to cycle. So I wouldn't say that anyone's impervious to that.
So you might have guessed it, guys. Joe does psychology.
Well, I do cognitive.
Very psychologist going on just there.
Can I just ask a question? What's the mirror stage?
Oh, in Lacan, it was just
Yeah.
you explain it.
Ooh, quite a few years ago. It's to do with, I think, the sense of self in a kid. I think the mirror refers to a mirror, like a kid seeing themselves in a mirror when they're really young, and knowing that it's them, and that sense of identity they get.
That's that really cute test they do, right? Where they put the red dot on the kid's nose and they put them in front of a mirror. And when the kid knows it's a reflection, they'll start wiping their own nose off. Well, they try to wipe it off their own nose, but before they know how to do that, they'll actually wipe the mirror. Yeah.
And what age does that happen at?
I'm pretty sure that that's different from Lacan's theory
Yeah,
of mirror
exactly,
stage.
yeah.
That's more of a scientific approach to
Yeah.
just kids understanding that they are real.
It just reminds
I
me.
think that's around like
Yeah.
2 or 3 or something that you get like a
Cute, right?
If I ever have a kid, I'm
maybe
going
it's
to do
younger
that.
than
I know.
We'll just put dots on his nose.
Yeah.
Well, there's also a really interesting one that I heard of where you say to, I think it's like a toddler, you're in the room with you and another person and the kid, say a toddler, and you say you put like a toy in a box. You've got 2 boxes in front of you, and then you put the toy in the box with them both in the room. Then one of your kind of colleague or whatever leaves, and then you take the toy out of that box and you put it in the other box, and then you ask the kid, what box does that person think the toy's in? And they will say, like, depending on where they are in their progression, they'll either say, like, they won't be able to perceive of another person's perception of something, because they can only conceive of their own view of something. So they'll say, oh, he thinks it's in the one that is currently in.
So interestingly enough, this links really well with, we were talking about Sacha Baron Cohen earlier in his in his show. His cousin Simon Baron Cohen did theory of mind work, which this is exactly referring to. And so the it's called the Sally Ann experiment, and the idea that
I didn't want to say it, but
sorry man, I know you had it already,
course,
but just for the listeners, it's called the Sally Ann experiment. So the idea, and please fact check me on this because I'm a little bit rusty on that, but I'm pretty sure that it's the idea that there's a certain stage which you can start inferring another's point of view, and that kind of leads in a bit to our biases as we grow up, but it's not necessarily well supported in adults, especially if we think about how that might relate to mental illness, for example.
God, the Baron Cohens are a smart-ass family.
They
Can
are,
I also
they've got a
just
lot
say,
going on.
we've talked about the Baron Cohens several
Quite
times
a lot.
on this
Maybe we
podcast.
should get them to sponsor us.
Or get them to come on.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But not
But-
Sacha, because he'll try and set you up.
No, I want Sacha Baron Cohen
No,
to
that'd
come
be
on
fun.
as someone else.
Oh.
Yeah.
Who? Bruno?
set them up, twist the table.
Ooh.
I think he'd outsmart us.
Is he still married to Isla Fisher?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, cute.
Cute couple.
Yeah.
Quite an odd couple as well.
But isn't he
not
actually quite
Canadian-wise.
attractive in real life?
You're not going to get him to come on now with that statement, are you?
There's a compliment.
No, it is. I'm just saying his characters are ugly.
That's so much work.
Yeah. It's not the actor I hate, it's the character he's playing. He's ugly.
I mean, his character.
Do you know what though? I've been thinking a lot about Sacha
Yeah.
Baron Cohen since watching Who is America, and I've decided that I think, one, I've stolen this opinion from other people, but I also agree now that I think he's one of the greatest actors of all time.
Oh, yeah.
Because the way he can do his things, especially in Who is America, and not laugh, because there's no way he can laugh during that. They can't reshoot that.
I
And
think
he can-
acting's more than just you don't have to laugh at funny bits.
No, but as in, most actors, I reckon 99% of actors wouldn't be able to do what he's doing in
Oh,
Who is
sure.
America and not laugh.
I reckon he's just brilliant at persuading people that he's real and that he's there for like a
Which
specific
is
thing.
crazy,
Just
'cause
acting,
if you
surely.
look at it, he looks
Sure.
shit. Like, his
Yeah,
disguises
that's
aren't
so
that
true.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are pretty rubbish.
Yeah.
But at the same time, though, if you're going along with, if he says something that you're like, yeah, that's true, then maybe you just think he's like kind of a strange-looking guy. You know what I mean?
To be
Because
fair,
isn't it
'Cause
all
then you
about
look-
confidence? Like, if people deliver things in a confident way, you're more likely to believe them.
I love Darren Brown when he does like, yes, I'm into pop psychology as well. I like Darren Brown when he does like stuff where he'll just go up to someone really I don't know how much it's staged ever as well, but he'll go up to someone really confidently and just talk to them and then like take their watch and then walk away.
Oh yeah, like pattern break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the person just carries on, just not really, either it computes and they don't really quite react to it, or they just don't understand that it's happened.
Well, how does he take their watch?
He literally just will go up to them and he'll kind of be in a certain way where it doesn't really register with them that he's doing something to their hand at the same time.
I think it is called, like, I saw him talking about it, it's called like, say if I was to shake your hand, rather than I'd offer my hand and you'd take it thinking I'm going to shake it, but what he'll do is he'll pass it into his other hand, so it'll completely break what the expected interaction is, and then that kind of throws your brain into like, what the hell is going on?
So my supervisors do some hypnosis work, which is really interesting, and my colleague does some hypnosis work.
I'm not susceptible.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm I'm normal. I'm in mid range.
I'm not even mid-range. I'm
And
not
wake up.
susceptible.
Can I be tested?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Jamel's is not susceptible either. I really wanted to do some weird shit, but nothing happened.
But I wonder if the mechanism for people to get hypnotised is the same thing that Darren Brown's tapping into, in this idea that if you're suggestible, then maybe there's something about the way that you're built
I
that
think
you can
also
get around it.
Talking about the experiment, the trick he does where he takes someone's watch. I think what he does to test if they're susceptible is to after he does the pattern break, he'll step back whilst still talking to them, and if they step forward towards him, he knows that there's a kind of connection.
So that's
there.
certainly suggestibility, like the idea that you can kind of lead someone.
Yeah, it's like someone
in a way.
mirroring your actions. if
Which
they-
leads quite nicely into your work, doesn't it? Suggestibility.
Not quite. But I think
I tried so hard.
Curie's links are great, but I'll work with that. That's fine.
No, because hang on, because whenever people ask, whenever these guys ask me what your project is, what you're working on,
Yeah.
I always, in my head, it's like some government conspiracy shit. Because you're looking at ways
delete that.
Ways to influence people's will or something, right?
No.
Okay, never mind.
Not quite. Well, basically, what I'm really interested in is...
Do that, though. That sounds way better.
I know. Or maybe, CIA, FBI, MI-5, if you're listening.
Yeah.
I'm here for hire.
Of course they're listening. They're always listening.
Is that what people in your field go into?
No. Clinical psychology. It's honestly not as flashy as that.
Oh shit! Are you doing the clinical doctorate?
No.
He wants to.
I want to. I want to do clinical training.
Are you doing... But you're doing a PhD right now?
Yeah.
So you're doing a PhD, but the clinical doctorate is another PhD.
Yeah, actually, weirdly enough, in some countries they don't even have a clinical doctorate for it. If you just do a PhD and then you can do like a year's clinical training, you're the same. It's interesting. So I don't know.
So you might go somewhere else?
Potentially.
Because one of my housemates, who we might have on the podcast at some point, Maeve, she really wants to do her clinical doctorate.
Everyone wants to do
but
a clinical doctorate.
But it's super competitive, she was saying.
And it seems very arbitrary sometimes the way they pick people on it. Like it seems that I know some people who've just come out with an undergraduate degree and they'll get it straight away, whereas some people who have done their PhD and have loads of experience and they don't get it. So it seems to be based upon maybe personality characteristics. I'm not sure. But I could be doomed from the start, who knows,
I'm sorry.
What are you sorry about?
She was pouring drinks.
I clinked the glass. Did you hear it?
Yeah, I thought it was just off camera? Off microphone. What are we doing? Right, okay. Okay, so anyway, my work. Sorry, I should probably contextualise that a little.
Listen, we've already discussed that I'm extra Aggie today. Just give me a break.
It's okay. It's
feels like I'm being interrogated on this podcast more than I'm a guest.
It might actually be raining right now.
No, that's even worse.
No, because that might make it colder. It's
but it's going to get humid.
No, it gets rid of the humidity.
So, my work. Not MI-5 stuff, although it's kind of cool.
But the thing is, because I remember at the interview, so... No, because we will talk about it. So...
I'd like to talk for ages about what I might be doing.
Okay, shut up.
We talked about this, we want less aside.
No, wait, okay. So the way me and Joe met, we met at an interview for our PhD programme, which we're now both on.
Yes.
Go us.
Woo!
Go
team.
And I remember when you told me about which project you were going for, which is the one you got, my response to you was, oh my god, this is some MI-5 shit. Yeah. And you were like, yeah, it kind of is. So that's why in my head I was like, you're doing something like... Of course you did. You're doing like a Project Monarch type willpower influencing mind control type thing. Or like looking at ways that a drug could change the way someone can get influenced by something. Is that what it is?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah,
okay.
That's nice. Okay, well done.
Okay.
Right.
See, segue.
Also, I probably said that because it just sounded flashy at the time, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you know me, which you do, Will Smith, I would do that, yeah. Just in case no one can hear what I'm pointing at.
I imagine you in like a leather jacket and some aviators, just tipping them down slightly and being like, "Yeah, I'm a big deal."
I would not believe him if he did that because it would not look cool.
In my head, it would.
Okay, so what do you do?
Okay, some MI-5 shit. No. What I do is I'm interested in the neural mechanisms. Oh my god!
For fuck's sake! Oh my god!
Unbelievable.
Okay, sorry.
And that's all we have time for.
Yeah. Right.
I apologise for this statement.
Stop talking! Just stop talking.
God, podcast hosting on here has gone downhill. I heard such good things about this podcast.
Have you
Did you
even
not
listened
listen
to
to
any
any
of
of
them?
them?
Mostly from Curie.
Bet you're sorry you ever encouraged her.
Yeah, quite frankly. Well, I was promised the first spot, and then now look where I am.
I never promised you the first spot.
You did.
Okay, Joe. What do you do?
I am really...
God, it's really hot in here.
I hope you're editing all this bit out.
No,
Right.
I'm keeping
I'll
it.
probably leave all this in.
Okay, I'm sorry. Right, I promise I actually won't interrupt this time.
You ready? Mm-hmm. You sure? Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm really tempted for someone to speak up now. Right. I'm really interested in the neural mechanisms underlying delusion and belief. And I'm trying to see if there's a common mechanism between the way that we think about normal belief formation and the way that we tend to see delusion formation in the clinic.
See, you know how I said sometimes he uses words and I know what they mean in real life, but then he uses it and I don't know what he means? That.
So that doesn't make sense.
I have a question.
Yes.
Delusion formation.
Yes.
Are you talking about people who are like mentally ill and have delusions?
But surely we can have, I'm leading on to your point.
So my participants actually are a healthy population, people who don't have a mental illness. But
Okay.
the reason why we're using healthy participants in this drug study that I'm conducting for my PhD is because we want to understand if we can induce belief change through a certain mechanism. The same mechanism that's implicated in people that have delusions. So the idea in psychosis, which is 10 to where you get delusions. I mean, actually, you get delusions across mental health disorders, right? But it tends to be quite characteristic of psychosis. So you tend to think of psychosis in, the traditional historical idea is that it has hallucinations, delusions, and then kind of cognitive deficits and depression, that kind of thing, right? Effectively, the underlying mechanism of action in psychosis, at the moment, the current theory is that there's a dopaminergic dysfunction. So you might have heard of dopamine in the media. Everyone always talks about dopamine being like the reward chemical, stuff like that. So, a lot of that is a huge exaggeration. And I know, actually, I think you work with dopamine, don't you, Curie?
No.
You don't? Okay, fine. Well, I have to explain it more then. Right, okay. So the idea is that because of this kind of a dysfunction in the way that we learn our patterns and our behaviours, for whatever reason, that's become dysfunctional, and it leads to these experiences of hallucinations and delusions. And the kind of classic idea in psychosis is that you tend to have paranoid delusions. So the idea that you're being persecuted, you're being talked about, delusional jealousy, that kind of thing, that all kind of comes into the broad idea of what you tend to see. But I mean, obviously, there's lots of different kinds of delusion. But you tend to see kind of paranoid delusion expressing itself quite a lot in the psychosis literature,
And
right?
is paranoid delusion is the one that's also the most talked about in the media, right? Because it's what people think that makes people into serial killers and shit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a horrible kind of misconception that people who have what traditionally was called paranoid schizophrenia, but now we would say psychosis with paranoid delusions, that they're more violent.
Paranoid schizophrenia is way snappier.
It is.
So
isn't
is there
it?
any such thing as schizophrenia anymore?
Good question. There's a lot. Well, it's a cluster of it's a syndrome really.
Okay.
So it's a cluster of things that seem to happen at the same time, but not everyone with psychosis at all has the same experience at all. Actually, the paper I'm going to go into later illustrates this really well. So, for example, you have a lot of people that hear voices, but they haven't got a clinical diagnosis of psychosis. They just they hear voices. They're perfectly fine with that. They usually have a relationship of some sort in themselves with the voices, and it either means something or they have it under control, like they know what's going on, they interpret it in a certain way. And then you have people that have hallucinations that might have a diagnosis of psychosis, and usually the difference is that you tend to have a lot more functional impairment in people that have hallucinations and psychosis. So they're probably quite negative, they're probably quite kind of calling you piece of shit or something like that all the time, or they're just commenting on what you're doing, and it's really distressing to hear this, and it sounds like someone's talking to you, but obviously, it's a hallucination.
I think I'm my own hallucination.
What?
I'm just like, if you have someone in your head being like, you're a piece of shit, I'm saying, I'm my own.
No, that's low self-esteem, Curie.
So this is a really interesting point, because there's a lot of the phenomenology work around psychosis, really interesting stuff, which actually kind of theorise that our internal monologue that we hear is the thing that most people would hear in auditory hallucination. So you'd have just an externalised version of our internal monologues, but they're just kind of
They identify it as someone else.
They're it's called external agency, the idea that there's an external intention behind the voice that's coming.
So they wouldn't, so they can't identify that voice is their own.
So they might eventually start identifying that it is, for example, if it's a variation, but the typical idea is that they think it's someone else.
So, Curie, are you aware that when the voice in your head says you're shit, that it's you?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so she's not having...
I'm not a paranoid schizophrenic.
No.
But again, hallucinations aren't something to worry about, because it's something that a lot of people experience all the time.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
So you're saying delusions and hallucinations and associating that with mental health disorders. Do people that wouldn't be diagnosed with mental health disorders, is it possible in, like, say, a healthy population for people to, or is that just characteristic of something wrong?
So actually, there's a lot of measures now that look at like delusions in the general population. So Emmanuel Peters at King's College, no matter whether that's where we are or not where we are.
Okay.
How about we keep that mysterious? We're not. We are. We're not. And then basically, she looked at the kind of the prevalence of delusion or multiple dimensions of the idea of delusion across the general population. So, for example, preoccupation with a belief, conviction in that belief, how distressing a belief is. All these things are kind of different dimensions that we might consider part of delusion. And actually what you see is it's pretty evenly spread across the population in kind of a normal distribution.
Okay.
Among people who are unwell and well.
So
It's not normal distribution, sorry, it shifts to the left. So most people have a very low score, but it does occur throughout the general population.
So the only difference is how it affects your functioning in life.
This is, so actually, yeah, so the new ICD, the new International Diagnosis Classification Manual that most psychiatrists will go by in the UK, now has a massive part of it being about functional impairment. So functional impairment has to really be...
like debilitating to
exactly.
your life. Yeah.
So if someone just comes in and says, I'm having hallucinations...
But I'm fine.
But I'm fine otherwise.
Yeah.
And maybe you just kind of have a chat about that. Maybe they'd be referred to kind of chat about that with a therapist, but I don't think they would be prescribed or treated as if they had psychosis because it's not affecting them functionally. Let's say they're still keeping their friends. Let's say their work's fine. They're just starting to feel like they start hearing voices. Now, not to say that isn't indicative of they might go on to develop psychosis, but at that point, I don't, and people like... Durham University, so people like Ben Alderson-Day, they're doing a lot of work to kind of look at, with the Hearing Voices movement, they're looking at actually how maybe we shouldn't think anymore of hallucinations as being part of psychosis. It actually should be something that seems to occur infrequently in the general population, and it seems to be related to psychosis, but maybe it shouldn't be a diagnostic
It's not
category
like a
anymore.
hallmark.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't think of it anymore as, oh, you can hear voices, oh, you must be unwell. We should maybe move away from that idea. But anyway.
So what do you do?
So I look at delusions, right? And I'm interested in why specifically in delusions in the clinic, you see people who tend to have more kind of paranormal concepts of the world. So things being, a kind of classic thing that you see when people describe delusions is that suddenly everything seems to be meaningful and there seems to be connections between things. So for example, I looked at my glass and I knew by looking at my glass that I was Jesus Christ, that kind of thing, right? So there's big jumps in the way that we would reason about something, and that might form a delusion, and it becomes quite pervasive. So to a point where if you said to me, well, you're not Jesus Christ, I'd be like, no, I am. I realised that I was. So there's kind of shared phenomenology that we get in that experience of feeling like there's meaning everywhere and connection everywhere, and the idea of paranormal concepts where information seems connected that otherwise isn't necessarily a part of how we think of physical reality.
That's just a random trigger then, rather than they see that as evidence that other people would understand that's being...
But this is a good point. So it's a belief that is contained in the person. So it's a belief that they are Jesus Christ based upon, well, what we would argue is perhaps no evidence. And it's not and it might be something that they would expect others to understand, and might be something that if I had a delusion, it might be something that I would expect to understand, but it might not be. It depends on the delusion, right? And this is actually a big, there's kind of a field in paranoid psychology looking at how we attribute paranoia. So my supervisor, Vaughan Bell and Nicola Rehani from UCL are doing a lot of work on this, looking at paranoia in the general population and looking at, is this something that we recognise in ourselves, that we believe, that we know we're paranoid? Like, do we kind of recognise that there's a bias within ourselves, or do we just attribute this naturally in how we live our lives without any kind of awareness of that? So it's that kind of split between having insight or not, but it tends to be people who are unwell tend not to have insight into it. And by insight, I mean, I looked at this glass and I knew Jesus Christ, but if I then went, oh, but I know that's not true, then I would be deemed to have insight into it, and I'd probably go, well, this is a delusion.
Yeah.
But by virtue of me having insight into it, it's not a delusion anymore.
Okay, but a person with a delusion would be like, I am Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And even if you questioned it, they'd be like, no, I am.
Yes.
Okay.
And or it could be the CIA's planted a chip in my brain, or it could be that people are talking about me all the time, or it could be that people are looking at me all the time. I know there's something wrong. So this idea of paranormal concepts, do you feel like you have magical powers? Do you feel like people are watching you? You tend to get this popping up in the clinic a lot. You tend to get this in people who might be classed as unwell. But that's not really explained. Why is it that specific phenomenology as virtue of the dopamine system being dysregulated? Like, there's no connection there yet between why we think of the dopamine system being dysregulated and suddenly these specific concepts are popping up in the way that we think about psychosis. So my study specifically is manipulating dopamine in people who are healthy and seeing if these ideas of paranoia and paranormal concepts change. And if we can show that through manipulating dopamine, these specific concepts change, it might give us a really interesting insight into how that then might connect to delusion formation.
So you're trying to connect like the like physiology to the symptoms.
Yes, we're looking at the neuroscience of it and saying how does this affect what we see subjectively.
I think there's an interesting distinction though between what we started talking about, which was kind of hallucinations and stuff, and delusions. It's like they're two quite separate things. I was just wondering how they kind of interact.
So, well, this is a good point. And so you might have people that hear voices. So, for example, if you...
And are we just talking like visual and auditory hallucinations?
There's lots of different kinds of hallucinations that you could have. Auditory tends to be the hallmark of what is classically thought of as psychosis. So auditory hallucinations tends to be, that's the thing that people tend to think of when they think of psychosis. Like, tends to be voices commenting on what you're doing.
Yeah, I actually listened to a really horrendous YouTube video, which it's like an audio file that simulates what someone with that condition might be going through, and it's absolutely terrifying. Like it's got kind of different voices saying like, jump, just jump in front of the bus or something.
Oh my god!
And yeah, it's horrendous.
It's really distressing for people.
And obviously, it must be difficult to replicate what someone's going through because.
There's a great, and this comes back to our idea of Vikings that we were talking about earlier. It's a great computer game that's come out recently, and the computer game company worked with psychiatrist Paul Fletcher in developing the main character who has psychosis, and she's I think she is from a tribe. It's like a game where she's from a tribe that was, I think, overtaken by, they're called the Northmen, but I think it's meant to be like Vikings or like the people who invaded Saxony. And she has psychosis, so the whole way through the game, you're kind of hearing voices and you're not quite sure what's real and everything seems a bit of a hallucination. It's really good, actually. If anyone listening is into computer games, I highly recommend playing that if you want to have quite an interesting representation of what it's like to have psychosis.
You know that delusion of, I think people are watching me, so that was one of the ones that you pointed out. But I wonder if right now, in the way that everything is that even considered like this common delusion anymore?
Is that just logic?
Because no, but not even that, but because it's such a widespread belief now by everyone that actually we are being watched, and like there's all these things. Is that even like a delusion that would stand out as being a delusion anymore?
So that's a really good point, and paranoia. So that the idea of the core of that delusion, which is this paranoid idea that you're being watched, is spread throughout the population. I think I talked earlier about Vaughan Bell and Nicola Rehani doing kind of interesting work about how paranoia is spread out across the population. You see that actually the idea of paranoia, trait paranoia, again, is spread throughout the population. It doesn't matter if they're unwell or well. But actually, when you look at it in the general population, it's spread, and the harm attribution that you give to someone's interaction tends to be more negative than when you don't have paranoia. So absolutely in the society where London, for example, is the highest city, or not the highest city, what am I talking about? The city with the most amount of cameras, for example.
More cameras than people.
Yeah, of course, that's not true.
It is true.
11 million cameras.
What? Or maybe it's Seoul that has more cameras than people.
I mean, if you count phones, definitely.
If you count phones, yeah, maybe that's true, yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
But the idea of CCTV cameras is massive in London. So the idea that you're being watched is probably there, but does it bother you every day?
Did you guys see that article that went around about someone did a test into loads of apps on the iPhone or something?
Oh, that they trigger like targeted adverts or something.
Oh no, not even that. They looked at what on their phone that app was using. And loads of them were accessing your microphone and stuff.
Yeah.
Without asking for permission. So they came out with this massive list of like, these are all apps you should delete because they're actually using things on your phone.
Well, I saw someone doing a test from that where they said, we don't have a cat.
Yeah, I saw that.
We're just going to say cat food like all the time and see if we then get targeted ads towards that. I mean, obviously that was just one example of someone doing it, but it seemed pretty convincing because they then did get
Really?
adverts for like cat food popping up
On
on various
Facebook,
different
right?
social
Yeah.
media platforms and things.
So no wonder people feel a bit paranoid about that,
Yeah.
right?
So actually, I think I should put my dad forward for some of this because he refuses. He is living in the Stone Age. Only recently, and I say recently, probably like in the last like 5 years, started using his phone to text. He used to only use it to
jeez.
call. Now we get texts and everything is double spaced. It's hilarious.
For what reason?
And this is the best part. He won't use email because he thinks the government is watching him.
You probably are.
I know they are. So he actually does have some sense, but it's just hilarious because, like, he's not that old. You know, there's older people than him.
Yeah.
Some of them work in our office, using technology and computers very efficiently. And meanwhile, he won't even use email. So he still gets all his bank statements in the post. Like, he keeps a paper address book. He doesn't have any. Yeah.
I think I can beat that with my dad.
Yeah.
So he deliberately clicks on things on a site like YouTube or some kind of news site to kind of throw off the algorithm. So he's like, I don't want them to know what I'm into. I'm going to just click on this. Like, take that, computer. What was great was
your dad is, I think, a bit cleverer than my dad. Because
Well-
I don't actually think my dad knows what YouTube is.
Okay, you say that, but he was telling me about this, and I was just saying, oh, for goodness sake, 99% of the time these things exist to make life easier for you when you're navigating these different platforms or whatever. And then, hilariously, later in the day, he was then on his laptop, and he said, I can't remember my password. I'm just going to go to the main computer because that remembers it. I was like, oh, look at that. What a surprise.
But you know what? This goes back to like even from as young as I can remember when I started using computers, I would always cover up my webcam because I was convinced that someone was going to hack into my computer and watch me on my webcam. And have you got it covered up as well? Yeah, I have a iMac at home, and I have a post-it note stuck over the camera, so I'm convinced someone is going to hack into my iMac and start watching me.
I do that too.
Yeah.
But I haven't really actually got any evidence of why I do that. So that's interesting.
Because I don't want someone to hack me and watch me.
Mark Zuckerberg
Does
does it.
he?
Oh, shit.
Interestingly, the paranoia research shows that if you're really low in your social rank or really high in your social rank, maybe as Mark Zuckerberg would consider themselves, your paranoia is up. Your paranoia is higher.
I think that makes sense.
For the high social rank people, but the low social rank people should just get over themselves, shouldn't they?
Look,
That's why they're low social rank.
Their low social rank is in like persecuted. They probably feel quite low. They probably
joking.
feel like people don't look at them.
Joking.
Why don't we just
You can't take it
exterminate
back.
them?
Don't
to be
hate me,
honest?
low social rank people. I'm joking.
In fact, if you're listening to this, we're
Curie's
coming
gonna
for you.
cry.
I have my researcher hat on here. I'm trying to be incredibly, understanding and compassionate. You can't switch me out of the gear like
Okay, I'm
that too
sorry.
quickly.
So, just to give it all, I know we've been having some extremely interesting conversations right now. I'm very into it, but like to just explain your research from kind of one end to the other. So, like, are you running a study?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm
explain that to us.
So, I'm doing 3 different studies for my PhD. My first study is looking at a new measure that we've developed to look at different beliefs in the population, so different themes of belief and how they tend to hang together in the general population. So we're looking at a huge sample and we're putting this inventory out to look at how themes of, for example, politics might relate to themes of paranormal or religion, for example.
So, are your methods a survey?
So this is a large online survey, yes.
Yeah.
So you're testing a new measure that we're then going to use in a drug study, which is my second study. That's, again, as I mentioned earlier, like getting people from the general population. It's in a double-blind crossover trial, which basically means that I don't know what drug they're getting on any session. They don't know what drug they're getting on any session. The pharmacist does. So they've got like a sheet that tells them exactly what drugs to give me, but I have no idea what they're getting. Kind of just really improves the rigor of science when you do that.
Very strong.
Yes, and we're doing a crossover trial, which means that every participant will get each drug that I'm giving, so placebo, haloperidol, L-DOPA. And then what we're doing is giving them a bunch of social measures and a bunch of like questionnaire measures, like I just mentioned, and we're looking at to see if specific traits pop out as a result of dopamine manipulation. And then my third study, I'm directly looking at presynaptic striatal dopamine turnover.
Right.
Now, what I mean, so
I feel like as the layperson, I've got to jump in there.
yeah. And I'll explain this. So basically, the dominant theory in psychosis literature in terms of the neuroscience is that and it's actually quite well supported, that people who are unwell with psychosis and have positive symptoms of psychosis, which is what we would say is hallucinations and delusions, they tend to have a higher production of dopamine in the part of the neuron that releases chemicals. So in a neuron, you've kind of got a junction where it looks like, you can't see this, listeners, but it's like my two hands, one of them basically cupping the fist of the other one, right? And the fist, effectively in a neural action potential, will fire chemicals off to my other hand. The other hand will receive that message and fire off an action potential and keep the message going.
So
right?
when it says action potential, it's like a message.
Like a message,
Yeah.
like an electrical message that's
What's
being
the
passed between.
upshot of that in real terms? Like, what's the outcome of people having?
Well, this is it. So the dominant theory is that in the striatum, which is a kind of a midbrain nuclei, which is basically a cluster of cells in the central nervous system, there's too much chemical being produced in the presynaptic part of that messenger system, and for whatever reason that seems to be associated quite heavily with hallucinations and delusions. But there's not really a connection between that and how it can possibly form the kind of complex phenomena that we tend to see in psychosis.
Because for me, when I hear dopamine, like you said earlier, I'm just thinking that kind of pleasure kind of influx. So it's not, that's more, the dopamine's more what causes the delusions rather than the delusions result in kind of any kind of pleasure for them.
So it's not necessarily pleasure. There's kind of a lot of different dopaminergic pathways. It's more learning and reward that we're talking about. So when people say that you get addicted to your phone because it causes dopamine release, that's anything that you do that is a repetitive behaviour will have dopamine release involved in it, because it's your reward and learning mechanism. So like when you associate,
Apart from going to work, maybe.
Even that,
Really?
if you go in a certain route, maybe that was kind of entrained through this learning and reward mechanism, because you avoid paths, for example, that might not be so useful, and you go towards paths that are more useful.
Do you know what? I think my dopamine is really strong.
All right, David Mail.
Wait.
Go on.
Let me tell you what. It was just when you said transport.
Did you suddenly get happy?
Oh my god, I love buses so much.
So no way, right? So I take the Northern Line, okay? And recently there's been a bit of a change in that the Bank Branch trains won't stop at Kennington anymore. So
Yeah.
I used to be able to get any train to Kennington and swap onto my desired train, and that'd be fine. It was all very smooth and used to be quite quick. Now I have to make sure I'm on the Charing Cross branch, or else I'm fucked. The Charing Cross branch I'm getting to a point.
Right.
The Charing Cross branch only comes fuck you. So it only comes every 10 minutes. So when I get down, and Curie is rolls her eyes at me at this because her commute is like way longer than mine, obviously, because she lives in Croydon. But
Let's not tell everyone where I live.
you know what, that's really funny that I did that, because I was being really careful not to mention where I live. or even
Flat
where I get on the train. So anyway, okay.
You can,
32 Lewisham Road.
So anyway, back
16
to
Lord
the
Palmerston Apartments.
back to the Charing Cross branch. So sometimes I get down to the platform, and the first thing I do is like I'm crossing my fingers as I walk down the stairs. I'm like, come on, be in like 2 minutes, come on, or better yet, be pulling into the platform. And when I get there, if it's in like 10 minutes, I get so frustrated. Like I get like irrationally angry. Like my blood starts to boil.
Alice, I think you've just become a Londoner.
Yeah, I think that
No,
just
don't
means
say
you-
that, Curie. Don't say that.
I
You're
think we
just
can
rude
explain
and
that in
angry on
terms
the
of
morning
your,
commute now.
Your
So-
morning anger.
No, but it's my evening anger.
So it's
Yeah, because it's the
actually
commute.
It's the commute home.
It's difficult to draw a line between the two, but it's more like when you teach in animal models, like in animal studies, a rat.
So you're just
Are you just comparing? No, I'm a rat, apparently.
Rats
We're
are
all-
better than mice.
We're all-
Yeah,
they
they are.
are
They're
better than
more
mice.
clever, aren't they?
Ooh, controversial.
Well, they are.
In science,
Yeah,
They're
apparently.
really
In
clever.
science they are.
Yeah.
Really?
as a species, they're cleverer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So anyway, basically I'm looking at how there's a kind of analysis called PET analysis, which is positron emission topography.
Say that again.
Positron emission topography.
There we go.
Positron.
Yeah, and basically what they do is they bind a radioisotope to the chemicals in your presynaptic vesicle. So the bit that
Vesicle.
vesicle. Anyone
Vesicle?
else?
I say vesicle.
It's vesicle.
Sounds American.
It's actually vesicle. So,
Like testicle.
yeah, exactly.
You're like that dude on Vine.
How are your
That's
vesicles?
everything wrong.
Vesicles. You hit me right in the vesicles.
All right, so
Right.
so the presynaptic vesicle. Go on.
This is that guy on Vine. Everyone knows this, right?
No.
The Vine guy that pronounced everything wrong.
Let me finish my
Yeah.
train of thought.
Sorry.
Right, so what I'm doing is I'm looking at the radioligand binding of this presynaptic vesicle with dopamine. This sounds
Vesicle.
complete jargon, I know. Basically, we're looking at how much neurotransmitter is in one part of the neuron, and if that relates at all, if the concentration of that relates at all to paranoia.
Okay.
That's all we're looking at. We're looking at a line, we're looking at association here.
And is there any kind of upshot of that if you find that there is a connection? Like, is there a way to control, more or less?
So at the
whatever
moment-
the hell you just said.
Yeah.
Going through that.
Well, antipsychotic drugs at the moment target the bit on the other side of that vesicle,
Yeah.
right? And unfortunately, that doesn't seem to actually. That seems to dampen symptoms, but it doesn't really get rid of them. So actually, it could be a new drug target.
So it's just saying, here's the problem. We don't know how to fix it necessarily, but
Right.
we know that it's here.
Yes, and that's the first step, I think. And what
Yeah.
we're trying to do is just draw a line and say, does the way that we form ordinary beliefs have anything to do with the way that delusions are formed? Because that would be an incredibly interesting finding, because it would have a lot to say about the continuum of belief and whether the delusion is just like a extreme version of belief.
Continuum of belief.
Yeah,
That's
That
great.
should be the name of your autobiography.
possibly.
The Continuum of Belief. By
I do need to make
Joe
some money off my
Barnaby.
PhD. I'm going to monetize my
By Joe
Barnaby.
Barnaby. Who?
Dr. Joe Barnaby.
That has a lovely ring to it. I really like that.
I will
My
not be
favourite
buying
part of
that.
the day is when I get predatory journals emailing me, calling me Professor Barnaby or Dr. Barnaby. And you know what?
That never happens to me.
Do you know
Ah,
also?
it's great.
That's
Because
exciting.
you're a man.
No, because I'm a man. And I think, honestly,
But what they actually
when I
do
read...
is-
It happened...
Okay, it happened to Demelza.
But
Take it
hang
back.
on, you're
Happens to
both
Demelza.
published already, aren't you?
Yeah.
So that's why.
Let's be honest, they probably say Professor
I know
Joe
you-
Barnaby, just like the letters in.
She's
They have-
the
they
last
have it,
ever
you can tell
PhD.
it's
There've been
wrong.
no publications yet. That'd be worrying.
Okay, anyway, so anyway.
Can I just add on to this?
No, my favourite part of the day...
No, just add on.
No.
My favourite part of the day.
It's really unfair because I would be Dr. Kim, and there's so many Dr. Kims. Continue.
Good point.
Try being
As
a
was that
Smith.
statement.
That's true.
Yeah, that's true.
No, but hang on. I am the Smith of Korea.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
Now that is your autobiography name.
You could start
Smith of Korea.
K-pop band
Yeah.
that like to model themselves after the Smiths.
Oh yeah.
Call themselves the Kims. Right? Come on. Someone has to do that.
It was really good until the name.
I swear to God, if my phone is listening and makes some sort of K-pop band based upon the Smiths, I'm going to be really annoyed and I
Or
demand
start
money.
promoting K-pop
Yeah.
bands on your own.
Yeah. K-pop. I'm going to start saying it more. I'm going to say it a lot in this podcast if my phone does anything. K-pop is great. We can keep saying it. Anyway, so my favourite part of the day is when predatory journals email me saying how great my last publication was.
How often does that happen?
Quite frequently.
Loads,
And they always
actually.
invite me to like conferences in like the middle of nowhere on like, would you like to submit your work to like the Journal of Science or like something really broad? Or they'll be like, we loved your work on different kind of font. This,
Yeah, exactly.
this
like
this
a
paper.
thanks for a wedding gift.
Yeah, exactly.
We loved
loved this, yeah,
set
and then
of plates.
we loved your work on hallucinations. Would you like to submit your work to the Journal of Postnatal Psychology? From the
So
toilet?
now we're going to go into Joe's paper.
It's not my paper. It's a paper that I've selected, right? Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Is that what I was
yeah.
meant to do? Okay,
Yeah.
fine.
Be like, oh shit.
Get
I should have
out.
used this to promote. Yeah, okay, fine. This is going to be a very jargon-heavy title, but you need to tell me if this is rubbish or not. Right, so
Go for it.
the title is Pavlovian Conditioning-Induced Hallucinations Result from Overweighting of Perceptual Priors.
Is Pavlovian conditioning the thing where they like ding the bell?
Yes, I think so. But
Yeah.
what was the perceptual priors?
Interesting. Yeah. So,
That's the bit I didn't understand.
this is...
Can you just read that one more time?
Yes. Pavlovian conditioning-induced hallucinations result from overweighting of perceptual priors.
Okay. Yeah, perceptual priors. Hit me.
So I'll go through it one bit by bit, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Pavlovian conditioning, you've heard of Pavlov's dogs. So the idea that Pavlov paired the ringing of a bell with the presentation of food.
So they go like, oh, I've heard a bell. Great. there's going to be food after a while.
Yeah, so it gets to a point where he can just ring the bell and the dogs start salivating because they're expecting the food. So that's called Pavlovian conditioning. It's a paired association of different stimuli.
I want to know what breeds he used. Like, how much salivation is this dog? You know what I mean? I couldn't necessarily tell if a dog was hungry. Just he must have used the hungriest, most salivating dogs
It's true.
ever. Because that doesn't seem like a very scientific
like
measure
St.
to
Bernards
me.
or something.
Yeah,
Are they
exactly,
really salivating?
Yeah, they're quite sloppy.
They're
I
quite
think.
drooly.
Sloppy. But if they're sloppy anyway, then is that going to...
That's
Well,
true.
it would be an increase in slop.
What I noticed was a significant increase in slop.
Yeah, you know what
after
I'm imagining he did in my head?
These were Pavlov's dogs.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, they're actually on the
He
internet.
didn't go for a specific breed.
So we went for a variety of
Also,
breeds.
he's a big fan of big dogs.
You know what I'm imagining? Oh, he had loads of them.
Tim Westwood.
They all
that
had
is
names.
a lot, to be fair. Oh, he looks like he's
big
covered his
dog.
There's
bases.
no small breed of dog.
Right. So we've talked about hallucinations previously. So
Yeah.
basically what this is saying is that through Pavlovian conditioning, through association of two different things, they're inducing hallucinations. So they're producing hallucinations in people. And they're saying that it's as a result of overweighting of perceptual priors. Now, I'm going to try and explain this the best way I can, but I'm not. This is from a part of theoretical neuroscience called Bayesian neuroscience, which is the idea that we have a certain concept already in our heads. We take new evidence and we create a new concept based upon the evidence and what we had before.
Sorry, can you repeat that again, please?
So the idea of perceptual priors or the idea of Bayesian inference, is that we have a model in our heads already. So I think this glass is going to feel rough. Because for
Why
whatever...
would you think
Stupid,
that? Fucking
yeah.
idiot.
Because it... So work
Let
with me
him
here.
explain.
Work with me here, Curie. This is an abstract reasoning thing. Right, so...
Oh, no,
Curie's not very good at being
Let's say...
abstract.
You know,
let's say...
in the 11 plus to get into secondary school, abstract reasoning was my worst one.
Great. No surprise there.
Was interviewing a second.
Oh.
Oh, I'm joking. Let's say every single glass I'd ever touched was rough, right? I might think that when I pick up this new glass,
Where are you living?
the texture is going to be rough. Work with me here. I pick it up and it's smooth. So that new evidence is updating my model that I have in my head, and I'm forming a new idea about glasses.
You're like AI.
Why does that even need a name? Surely that's just using
Learning.
logic. Yeah, exactly.
Right, so this is a big problem between Bayesian inference and neuroscience, because it's being criticised a lot that there's not enough evidence backing up this theory that actually that's how the brain works. We know the dopamine system works a bit like that, but we don't know about other systems.
How else could the brain work?
Yeah, I have a genuine question.
Not like that.
What is actually the difference between that and learning, though?
Well,
Like
that
just
is learning.
learning.
That is learning.
Okay, so then why does it need its own little theory?
Because basically what they're saying is that all of the brain works like that, and there's not necessarily any evidence to back that up.
Okay, can I jump in? Before we even deal with perceptual priors, can I just ask how on earth you associate hallucinations with a Pavlovian conditioning thing?
So great. Thank you for leading me into this. Right. So their experiment was super simple. Right. They got 4 kinds of people and put them in a scanner and gave them a task. So it's important to know the 4 kinds of people before I talk about the tasks. That's why I'm starting with this. Right. So the 4 kinds of people were people that hallucinated but weren't unwell, people who hallucinated but were unwell, people who are unwell but didn't hallucinate. And
Brexit voters.
And when I say unwell, I mean people with psychosis in this situation, diagnosed psychosis, and what they call controls, which is people that didn't have hallucinations and didn't have a diagnosed psychosis. So
we're healthy.
So it's 2 by 2, yeah. So it's either hallucinations, yes or no, or psychosis, yes or no.
Okay, can I ask as well, the people with psychosis but no hallucinations, what
Yes.
are the other symptoms they would have had?
So
I'm just curious.
So, for example, they might have delusions. They might have ideas of reference, so they're being talked about a lot. They might have negative symptoms like depression or anhedonia, where they lose pleasure in things. They
Yeah.
might have cognitive symptoms, so for example, alogia or thought disorder. This idea that we can't quite put sentences together.
Can we define psychosis, please? Because in my head, psychosis has always been like going a bit crazy.
So
Curie, you're not supposed to say crazy anymore.
Fine, going a bit mental.
You're not supposed to say that either.
Again, all brilliantly politically correct. But
Losing
when
a-
your head's like...
When your
"Ugh."
screw's gone a bit loose.
So this is part of the problem. So it's actually
short of a pound.
because the diagnosis of psychosis is so
terrible.
different from person to person. It's really hard to actually form like a.
It's like you said, it's a syndrome.
It's a syndrome, right?
So it's a broad spectrum.
In the diagnostic manuals that you would diagnose a psychosis, there's 3 types of symptom you can have: positive, negative, cognitive. Right? Positive symptoms are hallucinations and delusions. Negative symptoms tend to be like anhedonia, which means a loss of pleasure in things.
So positive
or-
symptoms are something you gain as opposed to being positive.
They originally called it because it's like something that is an addition to your experience.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's not something that's ever there. Whereas negative symptoms are things you kind of lose. So pleasure and...
Yeah,
No?
it sort of, but not really.
So, you know, say some of the symptoms of depression would be, say, anhedonia and not wanting to take care of yourself or anything like that.
Like low mood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are those considered forms of psychosis then?
No, they're considered part of psychosis. But they tend...
Okay, so
But-
psychosis is kind of an umbrella term for all the symptoms that come under mental health.
No. Well, good point, actually, because you get a lot of delusions across diagnoses. You get depression without psychosis, for example.
yeah.
But this is the thing. So psychosis tends to be defined actually by its positive symptoms. So if someone presents with like anhedonia or loss of motivation or kind of feeling tired a lot, fatigue, they probably get diagnosis of depression as opposed to psychosis.
Yeah.
But if they came in with that and then said, I have hallucinations as well.
Yeah.
It either would be psychotic depression, it could be schizoaffective disorder, it could be schizophrenia if there's some cognitive symptoms in there.
Okay.
It seems to be quite arbitrary actually how people make these diagnoses. So this is why what they're doing in a lot of research is breaking down the symptoms to single things and going, can we find a neural mechanism for this?
Yeah,
Because
okay.
then it's a lot more scientific in the way that we actually talk about symptoms of something. So come back to your question, Will.
You've got the 4 groups.
Got the 4 groups. They sat in a scanner and they did a really simple task. Basically, a tone would play at 3 different volumes, and every time the tone played, a checkerboard visual stimuli would come up on the screen, right? And they did loads of trials doing this. So literally just a tone would come up and a checkerboard would come up, and they were asked to press a button when they heard the tone, right? And the tone and the visual presentation would come up at exactly the same time.
I can see where this is going, yeah.
Yeah, right. So eventually, it gets to a point where they stop playing the tone and just have the visual checkerboard, and they wanted to see if there was a significant amount of people that hallucinated that pressed the button and thought there was a tone that played, when actually there wasn't.
Sorry, you just said that the tone played.
No, sorry, the visual stimuli came up but the tone didn't play.
Okay, right.
Sorry, did I say it the other way around? Okay. And what they found was a significant amount of people that heard hallucinations pressed the button when there was no tone but there was visual stimuli. And this was regardless of whether they had the diagnosis or not. So they've isolated hallucinations as a specific symptom that seems to affect this behaviour more. And they did also do some neuroimaging in this. And basically what they found was that the parts of the brain that light up are the same parts of the brain that how we kind of, when we hear something, when we hear external stimuli, this part of the brain lights up usually. And they found the same part of the brain lighting up when they were hallucinating.
Interesting.
So are you saying they were hallucinating when the checkerboard appeared, but there was no tone?
Yes.
So they were hallucinating the tone.
It was
they
an
thought they-
auditory hallucination.
Yeah.
So were they confirming by pushing the button, were they confirming that they had heard the tone?
Yes.
But how do you know they just, I don't know.
They
I've done
didn't
cognitive
just
tests
do-
before, yeah, where I've just thought that
But
I know I
that's
didn't
what
hear
is.
it, but I know I didn't
Oh.
hear it.
Yeah, so afterwards did they go like, did you actually think you heard a tone?
Yeah.
Or were you just...
So they looked at the confidence rating as well as
Okay,
people.
okay.
And they found that, again, people with hallucinations put a lot more confidence behind their tones than people that didn't.
Okay.
I would assume that the imaging of the brain would kind of almost back their claims up as well. Like if
Yeah,
is
if
that
they
not the case?
A
say-
bit, but there's a lot of kind of my research necessarily isn't in neuroimaging, but there's a lot of kind of caveats about the way they image, and there's some kind of criticism of that. But it does seem quite I really like the study because it's quite neat, and it does seem to support that actually in this study. So we shouldn't. My point is we shouldn't always blanketly assume that neuroimaging is like proof of something.
Yeah, sure. I guess in this case it could be expectation of hearing something rather than hearing it.
But even then, it's
Oh,
interesting
yeah.
this lighting up the same as you would see in people who are just hearing external voices, as in like just hearing someone talk, or actually they also image people that were having active hallucinations as well, without any kind of conditioning, and they found that again the same parts of the brain lighting up. So that's quite interesting, that it seems to be there is this kind of neural response to that cue, and it seems to have been trained through this Pavlovian conditioning. So their conclusion from this is that people who hallucinate have a really strong model in their head and about what is going to happen, this strong expectation, like you were saying, and that with training like this, it becomes very rigid. So the way that you expect to hear something becomes more fixed. So it's more based upon the model in your head compared to evidence outside. That's what they're kind of concluding from this. And it's really interesting because it also separates people who are hallucinators in well and unwell categories, which is something that's kind of good for the field, as kind of things like the hearing voices movement come out, and they kind of say, well, it's not necessarily psychosis if you hear voices, it's just a thing that happens and isn't that interesting, and we should look at that separately. So they're showing that specifically people with hallucinations, whether they're well or unwell, seem to have this response. They think a tone is playing when they see the cue.
So if you heard a voice, but you're not ill, then that part of my brain wouldn't light up.
No, as in, well, but what they're saying is that part of the brain seems to be what is lighting up when you have you hear external stimuli. But the point is that that brain part is lighting up in absence of external stimuli. So they're showing that people, what I mean is, people are, their brain is lighting up in areas as if they were hearing something from the outside, but they're not.
Yeah, so what I mean is, if you then, so you said before you could have a delusion from some, you could be someone who has a delusion who understands that it's a delusion and therefore you're not ill, right?
Sure, but it wouldn't be a delusion then, by definition.
Okay, fine, so you have this hallucination but you're aware it's a hallucination.
Yeah.
Or then you have the people who have the hallucination but they don't like... Do you know what I'm trying to say? And then,
I do what you get. What you're trying to say.
So then, if I'm aware that I'm having this hallucination and it's not me just being ill, then that part of my brain won't light up.
No, it will. So it's you got to say
the hallucination.
You've got to separate the
Right.
sensory experience
Okay.
from the appraisal of that experience.
Okay.
So you can still have the sensory experience, but it's how you appraise it that's different.
Right.
So some people who are unwell and have hallucinations will still choose to frame it in a way that it is from something else, that it's not them, but they're not unwell. Like
Okay.
they find it perfectly fine framing it in a different way. So you get a lot of spiritualist movements. Some people hear voices within that because it tends to be a community where it can be able to be talked about quite a lot more, and they frame it in a different way, like they're maybe hearing something from another world, for example, but they're framing it in a way and they're perfectly fine with that, and it doesn't affect their function, and they still have a social group, and they're not unwell, basically. Yeah.
So what was the group that reacted most interestingly to this of the four? Sorry, I didn't really hear that when you said it.
Right, so it was...
He wasn't listening.
No, well, I heard it and then I forgot it.
So it was most people get that effect when I talk.
Yeah.
It was hallucinators, people that hallucinated, regardless of whether they were unwell or well, heard a significant amount more tones when there were no tones.
No, sure.
But my thing of that would be, that's interesting when a very simple thing's being done, but then how can you relate that to very complex voices that some people hear?
Is that not a bit of a... duh?
Well,
I guess you got to prove it.
you got to show that it's still a thing. This is the problem.
Can't assume anything.
So like earlier you were saying, well, that Bayesian idea just seems like logic, right? Well, yeah, okay. So that's an interesting way of thinking about how we learn, but actually there's a lot of evidence that we don't necessarily learn like that a lot of the time. For example, in delusion. So how do you explain delusion by going, this is how the brain works? You can't necessarily.
So what...
Not yet, anyway. People are still working to try and see how that model fits with the data, but it's a process.
So what exactly is overweighting of perceptual priors?
So all that means is that your model in your head is you're relying on that more, or you're relying on the learned associations more than you are with external evidence.
Okay.
I see.
Right.
We got through the title.
Yeah.
Hey!
We got through the whole study. That was the whole study. We did well. So, and I did well without messing up explaining it, I think. But I might get a tweet after this saying I didn't explain it well. I'm sorry if I did that.
It's all like, I understand what you're saying, but it's quite confusing to then put it into like this one concise thing.
Right.
So could you sum up this paper for us in a simple language as you can in maybe 1 or 2 sentences?
Okay. So people who hear verbal auditory hallucinations appear to rely on their perceptual internal way of thinking about the world more than they do external evidence.
Right.
And this seems to relate to the part of the brain that processes external sound.
I see.
And that is regardless of diagnosis.
Is this something that is going to be replicated with kind of visual hallucinations? You know?
That'd be a great study to do afterwards. So this actually just came out last year, the end of last year, this time last year actually. So that would be an interesting thing to follow up on. Does it work the same with visual stimuli? I'm not quite sure the research area on that. There might actually be a study that shows that already, but I don't know. But the point is that people who work in Bayesian models would suggest that most of the brain works like this. So it's a question of conducting experiments to test that. Does it work like this or not? And
I think that the experiment you mentioned there is almost like I feel like if I was in that scenario, I would experience a hallucination of sorts as well. Like it's almost a way of getting people to experience a hallucination.
And so some people do.
Yeah.
But it seems to be a trait.
So people that take part in the study, would they know that it's a study about hallucination when they went in? Because I feel like maybe if you knew that it was a study about hallucination going in, you would be more primed to hallucinate than if you just went in thinking, I'm going to be doing this hearing test.
I imagine the way that they framed it is by saying we're going to do like a Pavlovian task. And you just need to press a button when you hear something, which isn't lying. I don't think they would have said this is specifically about hallucinations, because as you say, that would have given the game away, I think. But your point, Will, of like, you think that probably would have come up. And absolutely, some people who don't hear hallucinations sometimes get that as well. So it seems to be a continuous trait that seems to be present in the population, which is, I think, the point. They're trying to say, well, it's not something that you either have or not. Yeah. Perhaps it's something that is an extreme end of the spectrum of how much you externalize your own thoughts. And there's a lot of evidence. Clara Humpston, for example, does a lot of phenomenology about auditory hallucinations and where in the space of you existing do you hear these voices? Are they all across the other side of the room, or are they next to your head, or are they in your head? And some people even say that they hear voices, but the voice is in their head. So it's kind of like it's on the outside of their head, it's in the inside of the head. So there might be this kind of phenomenological continuum of where things are happening, but also a trait of how prone you are to hear a hallucination or not.
No, it'd be interesting to see if there was a way to kind of test yourself to see how likely you are to experience these kind of hallucinations. Like, yeah,
definitely.
I mean, I've probably had maybe 1 or 2 kind of. I had one like visual hallucination in my life.
Yeah.
I think we were talking about this the other week.
Yeah.
Well, I was quite down at uni, and I remember just looking and seeing myself under my desk. But as you say, I was aware that I was in my own body.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I had this very real kind of thing.
You saw yourself.
It was very kind of odd.
So that I think, again, and I think something that the Hearing Voices movement would propose is that even in times of real stress, all of us can experience things that we wouldn't otherwise experience. Even on when you're just about to go to sleep and when you're waking up, those periods of time seem to be a real kind of Goldilocks zone for having hallucinations. You ever heard of like phenomena where some people really hallucinate, like people at the end of their bed, for example, night terrors,
like nightmare. I think that it comes from. There's loads of. I think there's this famous painting of this like goblin on someone's chest, which is like. I think it's when people wake up and they can't move. Was that not to depict
sleep paralysis?
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's kind of tied into the same thing, isn't it?
So my master's project was on sense presence phenomena, which is another kind of hallucination where you just feel like someone's in the room with you, but you can't see or hear or anything. You just feel like someone's there.
I get that a lot. I get that a lot.
I had that like as a child, I'd say every night between the ages of maybe like 12 and maybe younger, 10 and like 16. I used to always think there was. I suppose it's probably really usual for kids though, because you know the whole thing of thinking there's something under your bed.
And also maybe, because with them, their imaginations are extra crazy.
So this is different.
But I was a bit older.
The developmental cycle of having these experiences as well is different. So you'd expect for kids that would be quite run of the mill, right? Like having imaginary friends, talking to. It's all part of development, right? But when you're an adult, when you're an adult, for some reason, we still have these experiences, and that might be indicative of something going on, right?
It's an important subject, I think, just because you get, because people aren't necessarily aware that hallucinations are quite commonplace. They things like belief in ghosts and whatever, and even religious kind of experiences, could be in some way attributable to hallucinations, and I feel
like all those people that said they saw Mary.
Yeah, or even back in the Bible, like, there's a burning bush. Is there?
Yeah.
Or,
I would come from the perspective of, if it's not causing you distress, leave it be, right? So just it doesn't matter how you frame it.
All I'm saying is perhaps the fact that there isn't much discussion or much acknowledgement. I mean, I'm just talking as a layperson. I haven't necessarily heard this. The fact that loads of people experience hallucinations, I haven't heard that discussed much. I think maybe a broader knowledge of that in wider society might result in more people being more rational about their experiences when they do experience things that could be perceived as being hallucination.
And also, probably take a lot of pressure off people worrying that for some reason they're unwell.
Because,
maybe.
For me, hallucinations, I would initially think about going to kind of schizophrenia or whatever, whereas, as you say, it's a massive sliding scale at which those kind of disorders are at the very end.
Can I just say, as someone that just was like, oh my God, that happens to me, it actually kind of freaks me out more, knowing that that's a hallucination.
Okay, so
okay, interesting.
So I get it quite a lot. So I'm 25, but when I'm on the toilet, and especially in the night, and the bathroom's dark, so most of the time I can't bother to turn the light on, I will imagine in my head that there's a killer clown standing behind the door, and then I know it's not real, but I'll freak myself out so much that I have to run from the toilet to my bed and get in my bed as quick as I can, and I'm 25 years old. What's up with that?
Maybe, this paper would suggest that you've got an overweighting of perceptual priors.
But
actually,
hang on,
if you
she's
took
imagining...
a scan of your brain, the killer clown lobe would actually be glowing.
But she's imagining it, she's not seeing it.
Yeah, that's the thing. I know it's not real.
Do you imagine it in your head?
Yeah.
And what it looks like?
Oh, don't act right. See, I know Joe, and I know for a fact that after a horror film in uni, he ran all the way home. So he can get on his high psychological horse. But
No.
when he gets on his high psychological horse, he's cantering away from a ghost.
I love that.
So when I get really stressed, or like sometimes in my life when I've had periods of great stress, I have a kind of periods of great stress, right? I have a kind of sense presence experience sometimes, like you're talking about as well. But yours sounds more visual maybe than mine. But I'll have experiences of feeling like there's something there that kind of freaks me out a bit, and I'll kind of, especially when it's dark in the middle of the night, absolutely, because there's not a lot of sensory stimulation around. So your brain
it's easier to imagine.
Your brain just starts constructing things, and that's a particular experience I have. And especially if you're kind of half asleep, you're not able to kind of go, I don't think this is really there. You kind of are more able to believe it, and you go, oh my God, this really freaks me out, and I feel it, and I want to go back to bed when I'm safe.
Like when it's dark and sometimes like I see a shadow and I think it's the girl from The Ring, but then I realise it's actually my towel hanging off the back of the door.
Oh, Silent Joel's gets
Could be the girl from The Ring.
Could be the girl from The Ring. She's very terrifying.
She is very terrifying. It was a wonder of marketing because the whole world is now terrified by her, apparently.
It's kind of a bit worrying because if I was in a hotel corridor or something and I saw just a small girl with black hair, I might murder
in a white
her.
nightdress.
And I'm a rational person, but I would, she would be just a horrible mass of bones and flesh after I was done. And who's the real monster there? Probably me, if I'm being honest.
No, it's society.
Who's the judge?
Yeah,
who's the
filmmakers?
We're not judging here, man. It's fine.
The thing is, there's one time when I was in my late teens, and I was like, I know everyone says this now, but I really like true crime. And I used to spend hours reading up articles on crimelibrary.com when that was a thing.
Yeah.
And I've read this I spent one whole night reading something about uncaught killers. And there was this one in particular about a dude who killed a pageant girl, and they've never found him. Like, even now, they don't know where he is. And at that time, I had a roof just outside my window. And I genuinely could not sleep that night. And I was maybe about 18 years old. And I could not sleep because in my head, he was standing on that roof outside my window.
Yeah.
Just waiting to kill me.
So I suppose a good food for thought before we go from this is, at what point does it stop being over imagination and start being a hallucination?
When you start murdering children.
In hotel corridors.
Definitely. Just like I'm trying to understand the difference, where the line is between belief and delusion, if there is one, and if it's a continuum. The same thing with over imagination and hallucination. Where does the division lie? I'll leave you with that.
So much to think about.
I want to drop your mic, but it's quite expensive.
Yeah, and it's large. Yeah, please don't.
All right, boast about your mic. How enormous my mic is.
My mic is bigger than your mic.
Yeah. The big swinging mic.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you know what I found really interesting about this whole thing? Is so Joe and I and Silent Demalza, we're all in the same field of neuroscience, but it's so different the way you think about the work. So each experimental concept of that paper I understand, and then the roundup at the end is where I'm like, how did you even get there? It's a bit like, what? But then I imagine that would be the same for you if we came in with a really hardcore molecular cellular paper.
Probably.
And then our conclusion was blah blah, blah this.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, I don't know, the way you then take all the evidence that you got from these individual concepts of imaging and then this that I understand, and then bring it all into this one theory. I'm really like, what?
Forgive me if this is insulting or anything, but would it be because like psychology, because it's based on...
It's not real science.
No.
Hey.
I'm kidding.
Insult your guest.
I'm from the institute.
Stop making comments and then getting anxiety about it.
No, because I feel like I'm being extra...
Follow through.
I just feel like I'm being extra controversial this episode in terms of like actually offending people, like real life people.
Like me.
But you say things and then you have these mini freakouts. It's really entertaining.
I'm in a really weird place today.
You are, yeah. I think it's the heat.
I'm rolling with it, that's cool.
Okay.
I've seen you like this before, it's fine.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
It's just analysing you right now.
So, would I be correct in saying that because I know you use imaging, but
One of my
you are
studies
using subjective.
One of my studies I use
objective.
imaging. One of them I'm
It's
using...
more theoretical though, isn't it? You're saying like you are in a way
It's
taking...
both.
Yeah.
Go on, sorry.
No, I don't really know where I'm going.
Okay.
That's it.
Basically, you need to just find a lot of converging evidence
Yeah.
over time, but because humans are so much more complex, for example, than a mouse, or arguably not, I don't know, but I would argue they are.
I mean,
so it's harder to kind of find very specific things. Also, you can't treat humans the way you do mice in experiments, so
You
that's
can't
probably,
shock their feet.
No.
You could.
But you can
Force
actually,
them to
well,
swim with no platform.
Yeah, get them to run around naked for cheese.
I did a pain study the other day, which was akin to one of those foot shocking mice studies, and it hurt. And then afterwards I said, that really hurt, and I put my scale as it really hurt, and they went, really? No one's ever said that. And I was like, okay, well.
Low pain threshold over here.
I was like, I'm so white, look at this skin, come on.
So
This can't retain any sun, let alone pain, come on.
Okay, not to change the topic, but also to change the topic. I actually did a module in psychology in my undergrad, and I loved it. It was so interesting. And it was really irrelevant because my undergrad was called Human Health and Disease, and it was like quite research based, and there was a lot of physiology, a lot of biochemistry, like kind of like, it was really, a lot of biochemistry. But we randomly had to do the psychology module. Fascinating, loved it. And then we had to do this MCQ, which we were told everyone passes. The module was only 5 credits, like it was just a bit of faff really, but I liked it. While studying for that exam, went down several rabbit holes where I would find out one thing that might have been slightly relevant to something we were studying in that module, and then it led me down said rabbit hole very, very far away, all the way to like Wonderland. And And I found such interesting studies, which are those kind of ones that we used to talk about, where before
really
they had
fucked up
ethical
ones.
approval and they used to just do whatever they wanted, like the Stanford prison
But that's
experiment.
bullshit.
Yeah.
Favourite
That's come
thing.
out as bullshit.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, they were actors and stuff.
It's completely.
Is that
Yeah.
the one where they have someone in a white coat?
No, that's Milgram.
That's the one where they got some people
that
to act
bullshit
as
too?
prison guards and some people to act as prisoners, and then they basically found that evil is inherent in all of us
right.
because the ones that were prison guards started acting really horribly to the prisoners.
Wasn't that,
And what
didn't
they used it to explain the way Nazis, the way so many of them did these horrible things, but that how could they all have been evil people? It was because
Just
when they
group
could shift the
mentality
blame
and-
onto a higher person, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That they just would act in whatever way.
Well,
But
didn't-
yeah,
didn't
it's
you
come out very recently that was actually a lot of it staged.
And also, they kind of like primed a lot of
Yeah.
people before they went in to be like that.
Well,
Yeah.
there was granted, this wasn't like a scientifically done thing, but I saw something recently. I think it might have been on Channel 4 where it was some teacher in America who'd run these kind of almost I don't know, kind of studies or little experiments with her classes.
This is the racist one.
Yeah, on racism.
Oh my god, she's amazing.
Yeah.
They
I
did that to
really like
us.
her.
I know
It's
the one
really
you're talking about.
interesting, wasn't it?
Wait, explain what it is, Will. I don't know what
Yeah.
it is.
So basically, they were looking at how racism is kind of really pervasive and can kind of make you act in a really horrible way. So I think what they did is they just gave people maybe like a ribbon or something. Was it? I
I
can't
think that
remember.
they split them with eye colour.
Eye colour, yeah.
there's-
That was it, yeah.
If you look on YouTube, you can probably find it on YouTube. She did a show on Channel 4 maybe. It was just one episode where they showed what she did. She splits people by eye colour. So then she'll have, say, brown-eyed people on one side and then other eye colours on one side.
And then
she'll
say like,
treat
the
them
blue-eyed
differently.
people are really
Yeah.
clever.
Exactly.
Brown-eyed
So
people
then
are
she'll get
stupid.
them in a room, for example, and the brown-eyed people have to sit on the floor, but the blue-eyed people can sit on chairs. Or they'll be waiting for a test, but the brown-eyed people can wait with snacks, whereas the blue-eyed people can't. She'll do tests like that, and then she'd look at the way then they'd start treating each other.
Yeah. Can I say, when I was about 10, teachers in my school did this to us. So half the class got, all the blue-eyed people sat on one side of the class and all the green and brown sat on the other. So I was in the other side. All the blue-eyed people, they were told that they're allowed to chat, like they could talk amongst themselves. They had to
Yeah.
colour in this picture and they were given like loads of, crayons and things, and they were also given sweets. And then on our side of the room, we had to sit there, we weren't allowed to talk. We had to like just write this sentence out like over and over and over again. Weren't given any sweets. Anytime anyone spoke, like we were told to be quiet. And it was really funny because at the start, like we thought this was all a big joke, because I think we were kind of old enough to be like, oh, they're trying to play a trick on us here, like what are they trying to do? And then after a while, like they'd keep shushing us and be really strict, and then everyone just started being really like nobody talked and everyone was really like subdued, and we were all just like, what's going on? Like it was really had a really strong effect.
It's really interesting. You should watch it if you can find it, because the way people react to it is really interesting. And then it brings up this really
They didn't go any further than that, because
Yeah.
maybe they shouldn't be doing that. Yeah.
It brings up this really good conversation between everyone, especially between the minorities in the group and all the white people, because it was in America, about how a lot of the white people would come out saying, I didn't realise that this is how you guys felt and this is how it goes on and all this kind of stuff. But there's this one lady in it who pisses me off so much, and I won't forget this. When they interview her at the end, she talks about how she's a school teacher, and there's this one little black girl in her class and she's so pretty and blah blah blah. And she talks about how one day this little black girl fell over and scratched her face, and she talks about how she was so surprised when she saw that under her black skin it was still red blood.
What?
Oh my
Yeah.
god.
Is that what she
And
said?
like, yeah. It's incredible.
Did she learn anything from the test?
I don't know. But then it's interesting though, because you actually get a lot of people. I'm just gonna put it out there. It's usually it's mostly all the white. Well, a lot of the white people. They got really angry and be like, "This doesn't happen." And I think a few of them left the experiment
I think like
because
Really?
they couldn't deal with it. Yeah.
I feel like if I was in that situation, I'd be like, I mean, I understand someone saying this doesn't happen, because obviously in our society it doesn't happen to that extent, but to reject the experiment as being symptom.
Yeah. The thing is, then you'd have the minority saying, "Actually, this is what we experience."
Yeah.
of course.
But then they would look at them and be like, "No, it's not."
But
And
the problem I have with
Yeah.
this experiment is I know for a fact, let's say that they said the blue-eyed people were superior or whatever. I know for a fact that if I was put in the blue-eyed group, which I would be obviously, for those listening, well,
I have got brown eyes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, but I know for a fact that I would be like
Only one. Let's just say.
stupid brown-eyed people, like, just to like wind people up. But then I feel like if they were looking at results, they'd be like, oh, look at that guy, he's an absolute arsehole now.
You're a massive eye racist.
Yeah, exactly. But you know.
Also, can I also say another thing that's completely kind of off topic, but kind of not. So you know the way back in the day, lots of psychology students were given extra credits for participating in studies. So there was all these studies done on psychology students and came out with all these different psychological theories that have recently been shown to be really fake because it was shown that psychology students aren't the same as the general population.
Oh.
Yeah,
Because they already know.
Also, just because in terms of their psychology, they're not the same. Like,
also, they're incredibly biased sample because they're all
Yeah.
like,
because they, like you're saying they know, but also I think it was shown that
Their brains are 50% smaller, I think.
yeah, I think I heard that.
You would say that as a
sound.
blue-eyed
Yeah.
Joe needs to go. So thank you very much both for coming on. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Good. Would you come back?
Yeah. Yeah, no, well, yeah.
Bloody hell.
Yeah, I don't think you'll ask me from back.
Oh, you can come back.
Oh, good.
You're a very good speaker.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'll come back again. Yeah, great.
You're all right.
Well, Will gets annoyed when anyone compliments me. Because I've got brown eyes.
Well,
He thinks I should be just sat in a corner saying
yeah,
nothing.
exactly. When you wear contact lenses, maybe.
Okay, anyway, so thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at Lay It Out Podcast.
You can read our beautiful blog by Beautiful Silent Melza on layidoutpodcast.wordpress.com.
Yep, that's the one. Lay It Out Podcast
Word vomit.
at gmail.com. And CoFresh sponsor us.
I don't have energy for anything other than
What?
that.
You got a sponsor?
No, we want
We
them to
asked them
sponsor
to,
us.
but they don't.
Oh, CoFresh, give them some food. Come on.
Thank you.
Yeah, we want snacks.
Would you want to shout out any other manufacturers?
Oh,
Sometimes
Will
we
Smith.
do.
Oh, no.
Vianetta.
Will Smith.
The Baron Cohens. Oh yeah, Will Smith sponsor us because we have Will Smith here.
Yeah.
And so the Baron Cohens sponsor us because we've now talked about you definitely in at least 3 episodes.
No, I don't want you to sponsor us. We just want you to come on and make everyone laugh.
Oh, yeah, I'll
I
do
think
that.
you should get Bombay Sapphire to sponsor.
Oh, yeah.
We
Also,
got,
we've
we got
got-
fancy with our podcast.
That is the gin of choice that you're drinking.
Yeah, okay, Bombay Sapphire also sponsor us.
It's because it was on sale.
And Sainsbury's.
Because it's a great gin.
It-
Alright?
Because it is
I always drink
delicious.
Bombay
Juniper
Sapphire.
berries, lemon peel, coriander.
It appeals to the blue eyes.
Hilarious.
Well, if you make a paedophile joke, I'll cut it out.
You know what? His name is actually Will Smith.
Is it?
And it's PT.
Cut.